K-9 refused to leave a car crash scene until officers discovered the truth in the rubble. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The highway was littered with shattered glass and twisted metal, the aftermath of a devastating collision that had left bystanders speechless. Red and blue lights painted the scene in flashing strobes, illuminating the wreckage of two vehicles crumpled against each other. The smell of burnt rubber and gasoline lingered in the cold evening air, mixing with the distant echoes of sirens approaching from down the road. Officer Daniel Carter had seen his fair share of accident scenes, but something about this one unsettled him. As he stepped out of his patrol car, his K-9 partner, Rex, immediately tensed beside him. The Belgian Malinois was highly trained, a veteran of countless search and rescue missions, yet his reaction was different this time. His ears perked up, his body stiffened, and a deep, guttural growl rumbled from his throat. "Easy, boy," Carter muttered, kneeling down to place a reassuring hand on the dog's back. But Rex wasn't calming down. If anything, his tension escalated. His nose twitched, sniffing aggressively at the air, before his sharp amber eyes locked onto the wreckage of a crushed blue sedan. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, pulling hard against his leash. Carter tightened his grip, wary of letting the dog loose in the middle of such a chaotic scene. Paramedics were already attending to the victims: an unconscious woman in the front seat, a badly injured driver in the other car, but Rex wasn't focused on them. Instead, he whined and scratched at the twisted remains of the sedan's rear passenger door. Something was wrong. Carter followed the dog's gaze, his heart tightening as he realized the possibility. Was someone still trapped inside? "Sergeant," Carter called over his shoulder. "We need extraction tools over here. Rex has something." Sergeant Lewis, a grizzled officer with decades of experience, jogged over, surveying the wreck with a furrowed brow. "You sure about this, Carter?" EMTs already cleared both drivers, but Carter trusted Rex more than he trusted his own instincts. "I think there's someone else inside." Lewis hesitated only a second before waving over the fire department crew. Within moments, responders rushed in with the jaws of life, prying open the mangled door that Rex had been so focused on. The second the gap was wide enough, Rex lunged forward, nose first, barking frantically into the car's darkened interior. And then Carter saw it. A tiny, trembling hand emerged from beneath the wreckage, barely visible in the dim light. A child. "Jesus," Lewis breathed, stepping back in shock. Carter's stomach twisted. "We need medics now," he shouted. Rex whined, still pressing himself against the door, as if he could somehow shield the small figure from harm. The firefighters worked fast, pulling away debris, until they revealed a little girl, no older than 4, curled up in the fetal position beneath a pile of fallen luggage. Her face was streaked with tears, her tiny body covered in dust and minor scratches, but she was breathing. Carter immediately unhooked Rex's leash, allowing the dog to move closer. The moment Rex approached, the girl whimpered, her frightened eyes darting between the unfamiliar faces. But as soon as Rex sniffed her gently, something changed. She reached out with unsteady fingers, clutching onto the dog's fur as if it was the only solid thing in the world. Tears burned at the corners of Carter's eyes. This was why he and Rex did what they did. "We got you, sweetheart," Carter murmured as paramedics moved in with blankets and oxygen. "You're safe now." But even as they lifted the child away, Rex remained rooted to the spot, his gaze locked onto something else inside the car. His ears flicked forward, and suddenly, he let out another low growl. Carter followed his partner's line of sight and felt his blood run cold. There, nestled beneath the front seat, was a small, wrapped bundle. "Hold everything," Carter ordered. His voice was sharp, urgent. One of the firefighters hesitated, then leaned into the car, carefully reaching toward the mysterious package. As he unwrapped the cloth, a collective gasp swept through the surrounding officers. Inside, wrapped tightly in layers of fabric, was a newborn baby. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The baby, impossibly small, lay swaddled in the bundle of fabric, barely moving. The only sign of life was the faintest rise and fall of its tiny chest. The paramedics, who had been tending to the little girl, snapped into action. "We need a medic over here now," one of them shouted, rushing forward with a thermal blanket. Carter felt his pulse quicken. "Is the baby breathing?" The paramedic who scooped the infant up was already pressing 2 fingers to its tiny neck, checking for a pulse. His expression was tight, unreadable, as he placed an ear near the baby's mouth. A second passed, then another. The tension was suffocating. And then, a tiny, weak cry escaped the baby's lips. The entire group exhaled in relief. "She's alive," the paramedic confirmed, his voice laced with urgency. "But she's cold. We need to get her to the ambulance now." Rex, who had been standing at attention, let out a soft whimper, nudging Carter's hand. The dog was still uneasy. His instincts had already proven right once. Carter knew better than to ignore them. As the paramedics carefully placed the newborn into an oxygen pod, Carter turned back to the wreckage. "Rex, show me," he commanded, trusting his partner completely. The K9 sniffed around the interior, his nose darting from seat to seat before landing on the front passenger side. He whined and scratched at the dashboard, his nails clicking against the broken glass. "What is it, buddy?" Carter crouched beside him, running a flashlight over the floor. That's when he saw it. Amidst the debris, partially hidden beneath the crushed glove compartment, was a small leather purse. Something about it felt off. Carter reached in and carefully pulled it free, brushing off the dust. He unzipped the bag, expecting to find nothing more than a wallet and some personal belongings. Instead, he found a thick envelope stuffed with cash. Carter's brows furrowed. That's a lot of money for someone to just carry around. Sergeant Lewis, who had been overseeing the rescue, peered over his shoulder. "What the hell?" he muttered, taking in the bundle of $100 bills inside the envelope. And then Carter found something even more damning. A second envelope, this one containing a folded piece of paper. The moment he unfolded it, his stomach twisted. It was a handwritten note, and the words sent a chill down his spine. "If anything happens to me, please take my children somewhere safe. Their father cannot find them. He will hurt them. Please." Carter exchanged a look with Lewis, the weight of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just an accident. This was an escape attempt. The woman in the car, who was now unconscious in the ambulance, hadn't just been driving her children somewhere. She had been running for her life. And now Carter had a new, terrifying question. Had the man she was running from found them first? Rex, still tense, let out another low growl, shifting his attention away from the car and toward the crowd gathering near the barricades. His hackles raised, his body stiffened, and his eyes locked onto something, or someone, in the distance. Carter followed his line of sight and immediately went on high alert. A man stood beyond the police tape, his eyes glued to the crash scene. Unlike the other bystanders, who wore expressions of shock or concern, this man was eerily calm. Too calm. And the moment he realized Carter was looking at him, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. "Lewis," Carter said urgently, "I think we have a problem." The sergeant didn't hesitate. "Go." Carter didn't need to be told twice. With a quick gesture, he released Rex's leash, and together, they pushed through the crowd in pursuit of the mystery man. If this was the children's father, the man their mother had been so afraid of, Carter needed to stop him before he disappeared for good. Because if they let him slip away tonight, Carter had a sinking feeling they would never find him again. Carter and Rex moved swiftly through the dispersing crowd, scanning for the man who had disappeared just moments before. People murmured in hushed voices, some still pointing at the wreckage, others pulling out their phones to take videos. But Carter wasn't interested in them. His focus was locked on finding the man who had turned away the moment their eyes met. Rex's ears perked as he sniffed the air, his body tense with anticipation. Then, without warning, the K9 lunged forward, pulling Carter along as he bolted toward the sidewalk. Carter trusted his partner implicitly. "Go, Rex," he commanded, breaking into a sprint. They weaved between onlookers, Carter barely avoiding bumping into a woman holding a crying toddler. He spotted the man just as he turned the corner, his jacket flapping behind him. "Hey, stop!" Carter shouted, his voice cutting through the night air. The man didn't slow down. If anything, he ran faster. Carter cursed under his breath. He should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Rex surged ahead, his paws pounding against the pavement. The German Shepherd's powerful legs carried him across the street just as the man tried to dart into an alleyway. But he wasn't fast enough. Rex lunged and clamped down on the man's sleeve, yanking him backward with surprising force. The suspect let out a strangled yelp, stumbling as he tried to shake the dog off. "Get him off me!" the man cried, his voice panicked. Carter wasn't buying the act. He skidded to a stop beside them, gun drawn. "Stay down. Hands where I can see them." The man froze, panting, his hands trembling as he slowly raised them. Okay, just call off your damn dog." Carter didn't budge. "Identify yourself." The man's eyes darted around, as if calculating his chances of escape. I was just watching the crash. I didn't do anything." Rex growled, baring his teeth. The K9 could sense deception. Carter had seen it too many times to doubt him. "You ran," Carter pointed out, keeping his weapon trained. "Why?" The man swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about. I just panicked." Carter wasn't buying it. "Try again." The man hesitated. That was all Carter needed. "Rex, search." The German Shepherd immediately moved in closer, sniffing aggressively around the man's pockets. When he reached the left side of the man's jacket, his ears perked, and he let out a sharp bark. Carter's gut clenched. "What do you have in your pocket?" The man stayed silent. "Hand it over," Carter ordered, stepping forward. With visible reluctance, the man reached into his jacket and slowly pulled out a folded envelope, the same kind as the one Carter had found in the wrecked car. Carter snatched it from his hands, flipping it open. More cash, and a note. This one was different from the first. "Don't let her leave town. I don't care what you have to do. Stop her before she disappears." Carter's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a runaway mother. This was something much, much worse. He looked the man in the eye. "Who sent you?" The suspect shook his head. I can't." Carter pressed the barrel of his gun to his shoulder. "Wrong answer." The man flinched. "Look, I don't know his name, all right? I was just supposed to watch. Make sure she didn't..." "Didn't what?" Carter snapped. The man hesitated again, then muttered, "Didn't get away." Carter exchanged a knowing look with Rex, who was still standing guard. "You're under arrest," Carter said, yanking out his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." The man didn't resist as Carter secured the cuffs around his wrists, but his expression darkened. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into, officer," he warned. Carter wasn't fazed. "I never do," he said, guiding him toward the waiting patrol cars. He glanced back toward the crash site, where the woman was still being treated and the baby was now safely in the hands of medics. Whoever they were running from, Carter was going to make sure they never had to run again. As Carter guided the suspect toward his patrol car, his mind raced with questions. Who was this man working for? Why did they want the woman and her baby to stay in town? And most importantly, how much danger were they really in? Rex stayed alert by Carter's side, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd as if expecting another threat to emerge. "Put him in holding," Carter told a nearby officer, handing the suspect over. "I want him under watch until I get back." "Yes, sir," the officer said, securing the man in the back of a squad car. Carter turned his attention back to the crash scene. The woman, now sitting on the ambulance's edge, clutched a thermal blanket around her shoulders. She looked dazed, exhausted, and far too fragile for someone who had just survived a high-speed collision. Her baby, wrapped tightly in a medic's arms, let out soft whimpers. Carter approached slowly. "Ma'am," he said gently, crouching beside her. She looked up, her eyes filled with apprehension. "Did you catch him?" she asked in a small, shaking voice. "We got him," Carter confirmed. But I need you to tell me everything. Who was he working for? The woman shuddered. I don't know his name. I've only ever heard them call him Cole. He's been following me for weeks. Every time I tried to leave town, he would show up. I thought I was being paranoid at first, but then I started noticing strange things. My apartment door would be unlocked when I knew I had locked it. My car's tires were slashed twice. Carter exchanged a glance with one of the paramedics, who gave him a concerned nod. The woman continued, gripping the blanket tighter. Tonight, I just wanted to get out. I didn't even pack much, just my baby's things and some money. But when I saw the headlights coming up behind me so fast, I knew. It wasn't an accident. Carter's jaw tightened. You think they tried to run you off the road? She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I tried to get away, but they were too fast. I lost control. Her voice broke. If you hadn't been there, I don't know what would have happened to my son. Carter exhaled slowly. He had seen desperate people before. People who would do anything to escape a threat. But something about this felt different. More calculated. Why were they after you? He pressed. What do they want? The woman hesitated, as if debating how much to tell him. Then she finally whispered, I think they want my baby. Carter stiffened. Why? She swallowed hard. Because he's not supposed to exist. A heavy silence fell between them. Carter's mind spun. That wasn't the answer he had expected. What do you mean? He asked carefully. The woman hesitated before reaching into her jacket pocket. With trembling fingers, she pulled out a folded document and handed it to him. Carter opened it, scanning the words. It was a birth certificate. The baby's name was listed, but the section for the father's identity was blacked out. Before he could ask, the woman whispered, the father, he's dangerous. And if he finds out where we are, we'll never be safe. Carter clenched his jaw. Now it was making sense. This wasn't just about a woman on the run. This was about power, control, and someone was willing to kill for it. We need to get you somewhere safe, he said firmly. Both of you. The woman hesitated. I don't want to go to a shelter. They'll find me there. Carter considered that. Do you have anyone you can trust? Family? She shook her head. They cut me off when I left. Carter sighed, rubbing his temple. This wasn't going to be easy. Then he felt a nudge at his leg. Rex. The K9 was staring up at him, his tail flicking. Carter looked at his partner, then back at the woman. I have a place, he said slowly. It's not a shelter, but it's safe. She looked at him with cautious hope. Where? Carter made his decision. My house. Her eyes widened. Are you sure? Carter nodded. You'll be safer there than anywhere else in town. The woman hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Okay. Carter stood, offering her his hand. Then let's go. As he led her toward his car, Rex trotted alongside them, his watchful gaze never leaving the road. Something told Carter that this was only the beginning. But he had made a promise, and he wasn't about to break it. The drive to Carter's house was tense. The woman sat in the passenger seat, gripping her baby tightly, her eyes darting toward the rearview mirror every few seconds. Carter understood. When you'd been hunted long enough, paranoia wasn't just a reaction, it was a survival instinct. Rex sat in the back, his ears perked up, eyes fixed on the road as if he, too, sensed that the danger wasn't over. Carter finally broke the silence. I need to know more, he said, keeping his voice calm but firm. If I'm going to protect you, I need the full truth. The woman hesitated before nodding. My name is Emily. Carter glanced at her. Emily, okay. And your son? She looked down at the small, sleeping child wrapped in her arms. His name is Noah. Carter nodded. Emily, why would someone be after your son? Who's his father? Emily took a deep breath. His name is Daniel Cross, and he's not just any man. He's one of the most powerful crime lords in the country. Carter felt his grip tighten on the wheel. He had heard the name before. Daniel Cross was notorious, a man with connections so deep that even federal agencies struggled to bring him down. Emily continued, her voice trembling. I didn't know who he really was when I met him. He was charming, attentive. At first, I thought I had found someone who genuinely cared. But as time passed, I started noticing things. The way people feared him, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room, the bruises on the men who worked for him. Carter remained silent, letting her speak. I tried to leave when I got pregnant, Emily said, voice cracking. But Daniel doesn't let go of things he considers his. When he found out I was carrying his child, he became obsessed. He swore that our baby would be raised under his name, trained to follow in his footsteps. He talked about legacy, power. Terrified me. Carter exhaled slowly. So you ran? Emily nodded. I waited until he was out of town on business. I stole money, changed my name, disappeared. But no matter where I go, his men find me. The closer I get to escaping for good, the more aggressive they become. Carter's stomach churned. He had expected something bad. But this was a nightmare. Emily wiped at her eyes. If he finds us, he'll take Noah. He'll raise him to be just like him. And I can't let that happen. Carter made a sharp turn down a secluded road, his mind racing. He had known men like Daniel Cross, men who believed they were untouchable. The kind of men who played by their own rules because the law had never been able to stop them. But Carter wasn't the law. He was something else entirely. When they arrived at his house, he parked in the driveway and scanned the area. It was quiet, secluded. Good. Come inside, he told Emily. She hesitated but nodded, stepping out of the car carefully with Noah in her arms. Rex hopped out as well, his stance protective. Carter led them into the house, locking the door behind them. The place was simple but secure, thick walls, reinforced locks. He had lived alone for years, preferring solitude after leaving the force. But now his home was a safe haven. Emily sat on the couch, rocking Noah, while Carter paced the room, thinking, "This isn't just about keeping you hidden," he said finally. "If we don't do something, they'll never stop coming." Emily looked up at him, fear in her eyes. "What are you suggesting?" Carter met her gaze. "I'm suggesting we take the fight to them." Emily's eyes widened. "You mean?" "Yes," Carter interrupted. "I don't just want to protect you. I want to end this." She stared at him, uncertain. "How?" Carter glanced at Rex, who sat patiently at his feet. "By giving them something they don't expect." Emily swallowed hard. "Which is?" Carter smirked. "A fight. Here's the next 1,500-word batch of the story." Emily's breath hitched at Carter's words. A fight. She had been running for so long that the thought of standing her ground felt almost foreign. "You mean we go after them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Carter nodded, his jaw set. "We don't wait for them to come to us. We take the fight straight to Daniel Cross." Emily clutched Noah tighter. "You don't understand. His men, he has entire networks. He owns people in the police, the government. No one has ever stopped him." Carter exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I know the type. I've taken men like him down before." Emily gave him a wary look. "You were a cop. You play by the rules." Carter chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Not anymore." Something in his tone made her pause. She studied him, noticing for the first time the scars on his knuckles, the hardened look in his eyes. This man wasn't just any ex-cop. He had seen things, done things. Rex let out a low growl as if agreeing. Emily chewed on her bottom lip, torn. She had always been alone in this. Always the one running, the one looking over her shoulder. And now, here was someone telling her that she didn't have to be afraid anymore. "What's the plan?" she finally asked. Carter gave a satisfied nod and walked over to a wooden cabinet, unlocking it. Inside was an arsenal, guns, ammunition, tactical gear. Emily's eyes widened. "This is a lot," Carter smirked. "Like I said, I stopped playing by the rules a long time ago." He pulled out a sleek handgun and checked the magazine before sliding it across the table to her. "Ever used one of these before?" Emily hesitated before nodding. "Daniel made sure I knew how to handle a weapon. Said it was necessary for my protection." Her voice was bitter. "Good," Carter said, "because you might need it." He pulled out another weapon for himself, then glanced down at Rex. "We'll need him," Emily frowned. "How? He's just a dog." Carter knelt next to Rex, patting the K9's side. "Not just a dog. Rex was trained for situations like this. He can track, attack, and guard better than most humans I know." Emily still looked doubtful, but Carter didn't have time to convince her. He moved quickly, gathering supplies and weapons, stuffing a duffel bag with essentials. "What exactly are we doing?" Emily asked, gripping the gun in her hands. "We're setting a trap," Carter answered. "Daniel thinks you're running scared. He expects you to keep moving. But what if, instead of hiding, we make it look like you slipped up?" Emily's brow furrowed. "You mean, lure them in?" Carter nodded. "We let them think they've found you, but we control the situation." Emily's grip on the gun tightened. "That's dangerous." Carter shrugged. "So is running." A heavy silence fell between them. Then Emily took a deep breath and said, "Let's do it." Hours later, they were set up in an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. The place was old, run down, but it served their purpose. Carter had left a trail, just enough breadcrumbs for Daniel's men to follow. Now they waited. Emily sat on the couch, bouncing Noah gently, her eyes flicking between Carter and the boarded-up windows. She looked nervous. Carter, on the other hand, was calm, focused. He cleaned his weapon with practiced ease, checking and rechecking every detail. Rex sat near the door, ears perked, his body tense. Then, just as the sun began to set, Rex let out a low growl. Carter stilled. "They're here." Emily sucked in a sharp breath, holding Noah tighter. Carter stood and moved to the window, peeking through the tiny cracks. Sure enough, 2 black SUVs had pulled up down the dirt road. Men stepped out, 6 of them dressed in dark clothes, armed. Carter turned to Emily. "Stay with Noah. No matter what happens, don't come out." She nodded, eyes wide. Then Carter turned to Rex. "You ready, boy?" Rex let out a soft, eager growl. Carter smirked. "Good." The front door rattled as someone tried the handle. Then a deep voice called out, "Emily, we know you're in there. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Carter glanced at Emily, who was frozen in place. He stepped forward and called back, "Sorry, boys. Emily's not going anywhere." A pause. Then gunfire. Bullets ripped through the wooden walls, sending splinters flying. Emily ducked, shielding Noah. Carter remained calm, pressing his back against the wall. He waited, listening. Footsteps approached. Then the door burst open, and the fight began. Bullets shattered the windows, sending shards of glass flying across the room. Emily crouched low, pressing Noah close to her chest, her heart hammering in her ribs. She heard Carter move with precision, his footsteps swift but controlled as he took cover behind the overturned table. Rex let out a guttural growl before lunging forward. The first man through the door barely had time to register the blur of fur before the K9 sank his teeth into his arm, dragging him to the ground with a violent shake. The thug screamed, dropping his gun as he tried to fight Rex off, but the dog was relentless. Carter used the moment of distraction to fire. A single shot rang out, hitting another man square in the chest. He collapsed with a grunt, his body slamming against the floor. Emily flinched, the noise overwhelming, but she forced herself to focus. She reached for the handgun Carter had given her, her hands trembling as she released the safety. "Stay down," Carter barked as he took out another man who was foolish enough to step into the line of fire. The remaining 3 hesitated outside, realizing their ambush wasn't going as planned. One of them yelled into a radio, "We need backup." "She's not alone," Carter cursed under his breath. He knew more would come. "Emily, you okay?" he called without taking his eyes off the doorway. She nodded, though she knew he couldn't see her. "Noah's fine," she whispered back, rocking the baby gently. Rex released his grip on the fallen man, his muzzle slick with blood. His ears perked as he turned to Carter, waiting for the next command. "We need to end this before more of them arrive," Carter muttered. He reloaded his gun, his jaw set in determination. Emily clenched her fists, willing herself to be strong. "What do we do?" Carter glanced at her, assessing. Then he made a decision. We split up. I'll draw their fire, take them head on. You get Noah and Rex and sneak out the back. She stiffened. I'm not leaving you. You have to, he insisted. If we both stay here, we'll be trapped. Emily hesitated, torn between fear and logic. But before she could argue, another round of gunfire erupted, forcing her decision. Carter sprinted toward the doorway, firing as he moved. Rex barked, ready to follow, but Carter held up a hand. Go with her, he ordered. Rex whined but obeyed, his loyalty to Carter clear. Emily swallowed hard and nodded, clutching Noah tightly. She crouched low and moved toward the back door, her pulse thundering in her ears. As she reached for the handle, a shadow moved outside. Her breath caught. She barely had time to react before the door swung open, and a towering figure filled the doorway. Daniel Cross. Emily's blood ran cold. He smirked, his eyes dark with amusement as he took in the scene. Going somewhere? Her grip on the gun tightened, her finger hovering over the trigger. Rex bared his teeth, a deep snarl vibrating from his chest. Daniel chuckled, unfazed. Now, let's not do anything reckless. Emily's entire body was shaking, but she forced herself to stand her ground. Stay back. Daniel tilted his head. You think you can stop me? He took a slow step forward. We both know how this ends. Emily's mind raced. Carter was still fighting off the others. She was alone with Noah. No, not alone. She had Rex. She met the dog's eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. Then, she whispered one word. Attack. Rex lunged. Daniel barely had time to react before the K9 launched himself at his throat. Emily didn't wait to see what happened next. She turned, cradling Noah, and bolted into the darkness. Behind her, Daniel's screams tore through the night. Emily sprinted through the dense underbrush, her breath ragged as she clutched Noah tightly against her chest. The night was thick with the sounds of distant gunfire, but her focus was solely on putting as much distance between herself and Daniel Cross as possible. Rex ran beside her, his keen eyes scanning their surroundings, ears perked for any sign of danger. Branches tore at her arms and face as she navigated the unfamiliar terrain. The uneven ground threatened to trip her, but adrenaline kept her moving. Noah whimpered softly, sensing the tension, and she hushed him gently. Almost there, baby. We just have to keep going. Behind her, a strangled cry rang out, followed by a sharp gunshot. She froze, her stomach twisting into knots. Carter. She turned, eyes wide in panic. Should she go back? Had he been hit? Rex let out a low whine, mirroring her hesitation, but he didn't stop moving. Emily knew what he was telling her. Carter wouldn't want her to turn around. She had Noah. She had to keep going. But the thought of leaving him behind was unbearable. She forced herself to move forward. Each step felt like a betrayal, but Carter's words echoed in her mind. Get Noah to safety. Through the trees, she spotted a glimmer of hope. A cabin, partially hidden by the foliage. Relief surged through her, but she knew better than to celebrate yet. Could be empty, or worse, occupied by more of Daniel's men. She hesitated, pressing herself against a tree, listening. The place seemed silent. No movement, no voices, but that didn't mean it was safe. Rex, ever vigilant, took a step forward, sniffing the air, his muscles tensed. What is it? She whispered. His ears flicked, but he didn't growl. That was a good sign. Still, she wasn't taking any chances. Shifting Noah slightly, she reached for the gun in her waistband. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to stay calm. Stay close, she whispered to Rex. Moving quickly, she approached the cabin, her heartbeat pounding against her ribs. The wooden door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. She hesitated only for a second before nudging it open with her foot, gun raised. The interior was dark, illuminated only by the faint moonlight streaming through the cracked windows. Dust floated in the air, undisturbed. It looked abandoned. Emily stepped inside cautiously, The air smelled of damp wood and old memories. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and cobwebs clung to the ceiling beams. "Clear," she murmured, exhaling shakily. She moved toward the farthest corner of the cabin, where an old wooden table remained intact. Setting Noah down gently, she checked him over, brushing away a few fallen leaves from his soft hair. He was safe, for now. Rex sat beside her, his gaze locked on the entrance. He was on full alert, ready for anything. Emily's thoughts drifted back to Carter. Had he made it out? Was he still fighting? Or had Daniel? She shook her head. No, she couldn't think like that. She needed a plan. They couldn't stay here long. Daniel would come looking for them. He never let go of something he wanted, and right now, she and Noah were at the top of that list. Her best chance was to get to the main road. If she could flag down help or find a way to contact someone, they might stand a chance. But before she could think any further, a sound outside made her blood run cold. Footsteps, heavy, purposeful. She grabbed her gun and pressed herself against the wall, her breath shallow. Rex stood, muscles coiled, his low growl filling the silence. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Emily tightened her grip on the gun. The door creaked, and then a voice. "I know you're in there, Emily." Her heart stopped. Daniel. Her grip on the gun was so tight her knuckles turned white. She forced herself to take a deep breath, steadying her shaking hands. "You've got nowhere to run," Daniel continued, his tone calm, almost amused. "Come out now, and maybe I'll let the kid live." Rage flared in Emily's chest, pushing away the fear. She had nothing to say to him. She wasn't going to negotiate. She met Rex's eyes. The dog's entire body was tense, waiting for her command. Emily moved toward Noah, placing a gentle hand on his tiny chest. He was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the danger surrounding them. She had two options, fight or run. Her gut told her she wouldn't outrun Daniel. He had men, weapons, resources. If she fled, she'd only delay the inevitable. No, she had to end this. She inhaled deeply, then turned to Rex. "Attack!" The dog exploded into action. A snarl ripped through the air as Rex lunged forward, slamming into the door just as Daniel pushed it open. A single gunshot rang out. Emily didn't hesitate. She ran. Noah in her arms, she bolted toward the back of the cabin, ignoring the chaos behind her. She heard Daniel curse, heard Rex's growls and the sounds of struggle, but she didn't stop. She had to get Noah out. She burst through the back door and into the cold night, heart hammering as she sprinted toward the treeline. And then, a voice stopped her dead. "Going somewhere?" Emily skidded to a halt. One of Daniel's men stood just ahead, gun raised. Her stomach dropped. Trapped. Emily's mind raced as she tightened her grip on Noah. The man in front of her, a towering figure with a jagged scar running down his cheek, grinned as he raised his gun, its barrel gleaming in the moonlight. "Daniel knew you'd run, Emily. He always knows," the man sneered. "Now, why don't you make this easy on yourself? Hand over the kid, and maybe I won't put a bullet in your pretty little head." Her pulse pounded in her ears. She had seconds to act. Behind her, the chaos inside the cabin continued. Rex's ferocious growls mixed with Daniel's curses and the shuffling of a struggle. She prayed her dog would make it out, but she had to focus on the immediate threat. "Think, Emily, think." Her eyes darted around, searching for anything she could use. The thick trees surrounded them like sentinels, but there was no clear path to safety. Noah stirred in her arms, his small whimper slicing through the tense silence. The man cocked his gun. That was it, her opening. Using every ounce of strength, Emily threw herself to the left, ducking behind a tree just as the gun went off. The bullet tore through the bark inches from her head. Splinters flew into her cheek, stinging like tiny knives, but she kept moving. She ran. Her feet pounded the damp forest floor, breath coming in short, frantic gasps. She clutched Noah tightly, shielding him from the danger. She heard the man shout behind her, his heavy boots crushing the underbrush as he gave chase. She couldn't outrun a bullet, but she could outsmart him. Emily veered sharply to the right, spotting a large fallen tree ahead. It was her only chance. She gathered every bit of strength and leaped, landing hard against the damp wood, rolling onto her side to protect Noah. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she ignored it. She had to keep going. The gunman was closing in. She could hear him, hear his ragged breaths and the cocking of his weapon. Then, a sound tore through the night, a savage growl. Rex, the dog, exploded from the darkness like a shadow of vengeance. His teeth bared, eyes locked onto the threat. He leaped onto the gunman with unrelenting force, knocking him to the ground. A startled yelp escaped the man's lips before it turned into a scream. Emily scrambled to her feet, clutching Noah as she turned to see Rex sink his teeth into the man's forearm, shaking his head violently. Blood sprayed the forest floor. The man howled in agony, dropping his gun. Emily didn't hesitate. She ran to him, kicking the gun away before he could recover. "Rex, off," she commanded. The dog obeyed instantly, but he didn't back away. He stood over the man, snarling, saliva dripping from his fangs. The gunman clutched his bleeding arm, his eyes wide with pain and rage. "You," he spat. Emily didn't wait for him to finish. She grabbed a thick branch from the ground and swung it hard, cracking it against his temple. He slumped instantly. She stood there, panting, her chest rising and falling with each ragged breath. Noah whimpered in her arms, his tiny fists curling into her shirt. She rocked him gently, whispering soothing words. Rex pressed against her leg, his presence grounding her. She knew she couldn't stay here. Daniel wouldn't stop. He never did. A rustling sound behind her made her spin, her heart leaping into her throat. Carter. His shirt was torn, blood smeared across his temple, but he was standing. Emily. His voice was hoarse, exhausted, but full of relief. Tears burned her eyes. Carter. She wanted to run to him, to collapse into his arms, but there was no time. "We have to go," she said instead. He nodded, eyes dark with urgency. "There's a road half a mile west. I saw a patrol car earlier. If we're lucky, they're still around." Emily glanced at the unconscious man at her feet. "What about him?" "Leave him," Carter said. "We don't have time." She hesitated for only a second before nodding. With Noah secure in her arms and Rex at her side, they ran. The forest stretched on endlessly, every shadow feeling like a lurking enemy. But Emily didn't stop. She pushed through the pain, the exhaustion, the overwhelming fear. They had to make it. The road was their only hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the trees thinned. The sound of distant engines hummed in the night. A road, and just ahead, headlights. Hope surged through Emily's chest. "Carter," she gasped. "Look!" But just as she took a step forward, tires screeched against the pavement. A black SUV. Her blood turned to ice. The door swung open, and Daniel stepped out, a cruel smile stretching across his face. "Did you really think you could run from me, Emily?" he taunted. Emily's grip on Noah tightened. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Rex growled low beside her. Carter reached for his gun, and Emily knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning.